Friday night, a glimmer of hope that the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie was at a turning point, a dramatic traffic stop, and a home raided by SWAT team members. Another man detained and released. No arrests, according to the sheriff. So what happens now as concern grows about whether the person seen on Nancy's front steps on February 1st will ever be found, and Nancy will ever be brought home? We're on the case, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Chris Stewart. "14 days later, and we still don't know where Nancy Guthrie is or who took her in the middle of the night from her home back on February 1st. Now, there was a lot of activity that we need to talk about that happened last night, specifically at a home 2 miles, roughly, from Nancy Guthrie's house. Also, there was a dramatic traffic stop that was allegedly related to the search for Nancy Guthrie. And these are pictures of investigators, FBI, and sheriff's deputies going through a vehicle that they pulled over in a traffic stop. The car was pulled over at a Culver's fast food restaurant. It's unclear why that vehicle was targeted. Now, the other activity with law enforcement happened at a home. The New York Times says the home, again, about 2 miles from Nancy Guthrie's house, it's in what's considered an upscale neighborhood, according to the New York Times. A woman lives there with her adult son. And this is according to a neighbor who spoke to the outlet. Now, the woman reportedly declined to comment to the media outlet. The Pima County Sheriff says that the reason that the SWAT team went to that home was because of a tip they received, and it was a federal court-ordered search warrant that was executed at that house. According to the sheriff, one man was detained and questioned, then released. No one was arrested. Now, it is unclear what the FBI took from the home, and it is possible that they are still following leads based on what took place and what they found inside the house. It's important to remember that with a search warrant, you have to provide evidence to a judge who looks and says, okay, this is something where I believe you can go into someone's house and take property out of it. So you look at that and you have to believe that law enforcement had at least something that pointed them in the direction of this house. But remember, earlier in the week, they did a raid at a home near the U.S.-Mexico border, about an hour from Tucson. You remember that man, Carlos, a DoorDash delivery driver. He's pulled over, he's detained, and he's questioned, but then he's released by law enforcement. And according to the sheriff of Pima County, Carlos's alibi seems to check out. So it doesn't seem like he was involved in the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie. Now, Friday night's raid happened hours after a major piece of information was confirmed by the Pima County sheriff that DNA, other than Nancy Guthrie's, was found inside the home. Now, it's unclear if that DNA belongs to the masked man seen outside of her home around the time that she was kidnapped. And it's important to remember that it very well could just be the DNA of someone who was inside her house, maybe a friend, maybe someone who worked at the home to help her. We know that hired help like gardeners have been asked to provide DNA samples. Now, speaking of Nancy Guthrie's house, we have to talk about a very bizarre scene that played out yesterday at her home. This is on Friday, and this is a picture of a pool cleaning company that came to Nancy Guthrie's house and cleaned the pool in her backyard. Now, this raised some questions, raised some eyebrows, considering Nancy Guthrie's house is a crime scene. The Pima County Sheriff said that the Guthrie family requested someone come and service the pool. Now, in an interview with Fox News, the sheriff addressed reports that a member of the Guthrie family may be a suspect in the case. We have heard that from the early days of this investigation. And the sheriff appeared to brush that off to an extent, saying that the Guthrie family has been 100% cooperative. They've done everything that law enforcement has asked them. But then when he was asked if any members of the Guthrie family have been ruled out as a suspect in the case, he said, no one has been ruled out. The Pima County Sheriff's Department has also put out statements saying that they don't have suspects or persons of interest in this case. Now, this does appear to be a major lead in the case. I want to show you this here. This, according to the FBI, is the type of backpack that the person spotted outside of Nancy's home, tampering with her front door camera, was wearing in those images. Now, the backpack It is a 25-liter Ozark Trail hiker pack backpack. And very interesting, the only place that you can get it is Walmart. That's it. Now, it's not some small sporting goods store, but it is something. And you have to believe that law enforcement is talking to Walmart and getting records and going through who bought that backpack, maybe in recent weeks or recent months, if there's anything there that could help lead them to that person we see in the images released by the FBI. Now, it could be huge in finding that person we see on the surveillance video on the front porch. And when you look at that video of the person in the mask and you see that backpack, you notice that the backpack is full. It's unclear what they have inside of it. Now, along with the images of the backpack, the FBI also put out a description of this person. They say the suspect is a male, standing around 5'9" or 5'10" with an average build. May not sound like a lot, but when you think of that height, you can rule out a lot of people. Now, the FBI also doubled the amount of money it's offering as a reward for information that would help find Nancy Guthrie and the person or people who took her. So that reward from the FBI is now at $100,000. Law enforcement confirmed to media that a pair of gloves was also found during an extensive search of Nancy's neighborhood. It's unclear if they are connected to Nancy's case. The Pima County Sheriff told KVOA TV that, quote, quite a number of gloves have been found in their search efforts, and some of them are as far away as 10 minutes to the east and 10 minutes to the west. It is unclear if any of those things could help find Nancy Guthrie. Now, the Pima County Sheriff in his interview with Fox News also said that they did not find a glove inside Nancy Guthrie's house or on her property specifically. It's unclear what other pieces of video law enforcement have in this case. You know, if it's more than just what we've seen, that we know the FBI had to go and dig very deep, they say, into the servers for the Nest camera to pull out images that they didn't think existed until just a couple of days ago, showing that man on the front steps. Again, it's unclear what other pieces of information they have, the video that they potentially could release to the public, but we do know that they are asking the public for more video, specifically people with home surveillance cameras, just like Nancy Guthrie apparently had. Thursday afternoon, the sheriff put this call out saying that they want video from January 1st to February 2nd, 2026 of a 2-mile radius of this part of town. This is near East Skyline Drive and North Campbell Avenue, and they want anything that shows vehicles, traffic, pedestrians, or suspicious activity. Now, Nancy's home is about a 4-minute drive south of that intersection, and law enforcement say they are reaching out to people on the Neighbors app. So anybody watching, if you get a request from law enforcement for video, if you're joining us from Pima County, Arizona, the official request will have like a blue check mark on it. Now, law enforcement also put a link out on X for people to submit videos as evidence. Previously, law enforcement did say they were looking for video at specific times that I want to talk about again, because KVOA TV said that people in the Catalina Foothills area of Tucson, that's where Nancy lives, were asked for surveillance camera footage for very specific times, like January 11th between 9 p.m. and midnight. That's roughly 22 days before Nancy was taken. Then they also want footage from the morning of January 31st. That's the day before Nancy was taken, between 9:30 in the morning and 11 a.m. And KVOA says that's because there is a suspicious vehicle on a street at around 10 o'clock in the morning nearby. So with that said, I want to show you the missing persons poster that's now out by the FBI. And again, the reward at $100,000 for information to find her or the people who may have taken her. And if you have any information on Nancy Guthrie, contact the Pima County Sheriff's Department, 520-351-4900 for the FBI, 1-800-CALL-FBI, or tips.fbi.gov. Joining us now to talk about the latest on this case is retired NYPD Detective Tom Smith, co-host of the Gold Shield Show. It's always great to have you on Law and Crime. Last night, we're following along once again as a SWAT team moves in. You have two different locations. You have this traffic stop, and then you have a raid of a house. And from the outside, it feels like, okay, here we go. This is, it's heading in the right direction. And now we're finding out that both people who are detained have been released. What do you make of that development?
Well, let's back up a little bit with what happened before that. They had to have enough evidence to go in front of a judge and get a warrant. So in order to get the warrant, you got to show the probable cause of that warrant, not just where you want it, but you have to get into specifics about what you're looking for and where in that house you're going to search. You can't just blankly get I want a search warrant for this house. So they would have had to have laid this case out to a judge about what they have, and none of this obviously we know, in the public. So the judge was convinced that they had enough to issue this warrant, and then they went and tactically took it down and took the warrant into play and came up with what it was. So where we're at now is, again, every time in this case, Chris, we go kind of 3 or 4 steps forward, we go back 5. And that's just the way the pace of this case has been going. But it's not unusual. Complex cases like this is what happens.
Yeah, and we were talking to a retired homicide detective from Pima County yesterday, and it was about, I just asked about, because I can see frustration from the public, and I know, like, if you're an investigator, like, who cares what the public, someone on the internet and like criticism like that, but it's like they keep going back to Nancy's house or Annie's house, and it's like, well, what did you find today that you couldn't have found like yesterday? And I know that that's just kind of how this process goes forward. When someone is detained, we'll see someone get arrested and we know that then they're in custody. But then there's also times where it might be a witness or someone who may have some information, and then they're invited down to the police station, and then they can, have an interview with detectives there. How would you characterize that?
Well, it all depends on the circumstances. All right. These are very specific circumstances that have to do with the search warrant. So when that was one of the points that came out last night, one of them was handcuffed. People get handcuffed for everyone's safety. That is why they're handcuffed, because the police going in, the agents going in, don't know who these people are. And if it has anything to do related to this crime, the perp who was at that front door did have a firearm on them. So you have to take that all into account. So detaining them means they can't hold them indefinitely, but at that moment, they're not free to leave until questions are answered. Now, if they want a lawyer, fine. That's their absolute right to do so. But they're conducting an investigation, and that at that time are not free to leave. Then process goes on, things get straightened out, questions get answered, and then, everyone's free to go, and we'll be in touch. I guarantee you, as I sit here, they're not alone. All right. There's a couple of cars around that area making sure they don't take off. They don't head to an airport. They don't head for a border, something like that, because they're still on the radar, and there's still questions out there about that warrant last night.
With the detaining as well, like I know you can hold someone for like 24 hours. And in this case, I think they were held for about 12 or less. Do you read into anything that they were let go, where it wasn't like, we're going to hold you up until that exact moment, which would be probably like 3:00 tomorrow morning or something like that, like when they were brought into custody. Do you read into the fact that they were released far before, they could have been released?
No, because what, as a detective who did this, we took people in for questioning all the time. The people who have intimate knowledge of this case and every piece of evidence they have are going to know within a little while whether these people are involved or not, just through questioning, through interviews, through some sort of interrogation. They're going to know whether they're on the right track or not. And if you're on the right track, that time frame extends, obviously. If you know that they're not involved, then you don't really play games with it, trying to come up with different things. But they're going to, I guarantee you, they took their time, and the people who have the best knowledge of this case are the ones who are questioning them to make sure all the questions got answered and they're on the right track, or they're not on the right track. And obviously there was enough last night with the interviews that were conducted to let them go at this time.
And when you look at, and I know the gentleman Carlos in Ricos, Arizona earlier, the sheriff said earlier this week that his alibi seems to check out, but it was like cell phone data that had them believing that he was someone that they just wanted to talk to. And then they did a court-ordered search of his home. And then we don't really know the details as of yet officially about what led them to this house about 2 miles from Nancy Guthrie's home. And then you have this traffic stop at a Culver's nearby. But just from what you're kind of seeing on the outside, like, what seems to be the strategy of how they're identifying people who they want to talk to?
Oh, there's probably a number of ways, Chris. You have cell phone data. You have any DNA test they're doing. We don't know the results of the plea to the public of looking at their cameras on their houses for a certain period of time. So, and just the leads that are coming in. I mean, they're up to, I think, 30,000 leads that they have gotten since the video came out. So you have to track them down. And if one comes in that's viable, and you go through it and you can collaborate what they're saying on the tip, that's going to lead to maybe another step and another step. So it all has to do with what's being collected and what the investigators know right now. And again, I'm telling you right now, we know maybe 5% of what they know right now.
And that's a good point, especially because, and I can see the exhaustion in the comment section of some of our stories. And then if you search online, of people just wanting an answer to this case, but it is taking time to, definitively figure out what happened. Kind of one other kind of anecdotal part of it that stood out to me was in the detaining the other night with the gentleman near the US Mexico border. Like, he talked about whether it was the agents or deputies who were interviewing him, that they had said they think that his eyes look like the person in the surveillance picture. And then his mother-in-law said that when they came into the home with the search warrant, they showed the surveillance pictures and said, "Is this your son-in-law?" And it's like, when I heard that, like, I was worried, where it felt like they really thought they had the guy and they didn't, according to the sheriff. Is there any concern that might have been the path that they were taking? But then really at the end of the day, like, now they're kind of, okay, this guy wasn't it. Now we have to start back at square one and figure out who else might have been in the area that night.
Oh, sure. I hope, I'm gonna take a leap in doing this for over 30 years, that they didn't just go on what the eyes look like. All right. I'm gonna go out on a limb and say there was a lot more to it than just his eyes. They might have said that to him or his family, but you're not going to a judge to get a warrant and saying, well, his eyes match. So there was much more to do with that. But the thing about this, Chris, is you have, and let me just try to explain how it works. So when you have this complex of a case, you have certain groups and certain teams that are tasked to do certain things: LPR readers, surveillance cameras, background checks of people in the area, criminal histories of people. You have different teams who are tasked to do stuff. So even when this happens, and a takedown of this magnitude took place last night, all those other groups are still working, and they're still coming up with other things that might lead them to the conclusion of this case. So just because an operation like last night takes place, everything doesn't shut down. Everything's still going on. So as much as last night we all thought looked good, there's still leads that are being followed up.
And there's so many cases where even with, statements that are made by law enforcement to the public, like, they could be working something else behind the scenes entirely. I keep thinking back to Brian Kohberger, and it was, hey, we don't have a suspect, and everybody's piling on law enforcement in Idaho, but they very much did. They were just kind of building their case as it goes. Clearly in that situation, though, you're dealing with what we knew at the time was a murder. In this case, it's still trying to figure out where Nancy Guthrie actually is. On some of the public statements part of it, and this is, maybe it's something that's playing out on the sideline, but it's everybody trying to read into the sheriff and what he's saying. And he was giving news conferences, but now he's not. But then he's giving some statements in interviews. And you see the public frustration from that. Like, really, at the end of the day, and I'm all for, getting as much information as we can in the media, but how much does, like, the public side of it and how much they know? And I know that there's a ton of speculation, and this is very unique that way. How much does that actually impact the people who are working on this case?
Well, you try not to listen to what's going on outside of those teams, because then you just get distracted and you can start going down a path that isn't a lead and doesn't mean much, but you're taking up the resources to do that. Do I agree with not completely freezing out everyone? No. I think there's a certain level that you need to keep everyone just informed, not specifics, not to jeopardize the integrity of the case, but just keep them informed. Because, like I've said numerous times, Chris, when you completely freeze everybody out is when conspiracy theories start and rumors start and people's imaginations just go off on a tangent. And that's what gets distracting, because then those people who are thinking just the weirdest and wildest things, they're the ones making calls into that tip line, taking time out of investigators to work real leads. and leads that are viable, not just someone's imagination because they haven't heard from the sheriff or the FBI in a couple of days.
Yeah, because it's and we're starting to see that. I mean, you just search online and you're like, and you're trying to follow down every lead, even on our end, trying to figure out what might actually be a legitimate thing to follow. And so much of it is just not true. And we'll see how the rest of this case plays out. I haven't had a chance to ask you just about the surveillance video that came in. And when you see this person in their mask. They have that backpack. We believe we know the brand and that it's something that was sold at Walmart. Like, what stood out to you the first time you saw that video?
The first time I saw it, and I watched it, I remember when I finally got it and watched it about 5, 6, 7 times and kept coming up with the same conclusion. He's not a master criminal. He's an amateur about what he's doing. And I still, to this day, I've said it over and over again in the beginning of this case. I don't think the target of this was a kidnapping. I think that was a secondary thought. He doesn't act like he's in any rush. It's a, oh my God, I got to get in this house before the person in the house sees me. He doesn't have that kind of demeanor while he's walking around the house. And so to me, I don't even think he knew someone was home. He might have been watching the house earlier and seen Nancy leave, but then had no idea she came back. He doesn't seem like he's in a rush to do anything. If someone's in a house and they're your target to get, of a kidnapping, you're in a rush. You got to get in and out, get it, grab it in the car and away. Not just walk in and trying to cover a camera, and all that was very weird to me. And like I said, I still think the kidnapping was not the initial plan, but a secondary crime.
Because I felt like watching it. It's like on one hand, he had no idea that the camera was there until he saw it, but it like didn't phase him, which like that was kind of chilling. Where I mean, you often see with like people who are trying to break into homes and like some of these Ring doorbell cameras, like they book the second that they think that they're actually on camera, and like this person wasn't phased by it at all. The backpack, knowing the brand of it, knowing it was sold at Walmart, it seems like a pretty big lead that could help them, but at the same time, it's not like a small sporting goods store. And who knows if that backpack was even purchased within the last, couple months or years. Like, how big of a deal is that to trying to piece together who that is?
Well, it becomes a big puzzle. You see the video, you identify the backpack, the stores that it's sold in. So you go to those stores, and I would go back at least a month or two to try to see if they could come up with a SKU number of that time frame, and if any were sold during that time. And then you're going to match that up with maybe any videos that are over registers, of maybe anyone being captured buying those. It takes a lot. Don't get me wrong. I just rattled that off in about 15 seconds, and it's a lot. It's a lot of hard work. It's a lot of meticulous work, but it is something to follow up on, and a lead that can be run down. And I think that's what they're doing, because you're going to start in that area. So you're going to go to the closest Walmart, and then you're going to kind of work outward, from there. But Walmart's not the only store that sells it. It's just one of the most popular ones. So you're running into just other merchants as well that could be selling this, but you have to start somewhere. And I think that's a viable beginning.
And now that we're officially, this is day 14. So it's been 2 weeks since she was taken. And again, there's probably 95% of, there's not, a lot of leaks coming out. I mean, I know that there's a lot of statements from the sheriff back and forth, but it seems like the people closest to the investigation, as far as like the FBI agents, the Guthrie family, all of that, there's not a lot of information coming out of there. One statement that got a little bit of traction yesterday was looking at the family, and they've been super cooperative, 100%. The sheriff says they've done everything. And then it was like, well, if the family's ruled out yet, and he says, well, nobody's ruled out. And then suddenly people look at that and say, well, the family's not being ruled out. Like, how do you actually rule someone out at this point?
Well, the sheriff's been saying a couple of things he probably shouldn't, elaborate on. He just contradicted himself in one statement. So right. No one, listen, until someone is in handcuffs and in jail and charged, no one's off the hook. Everyone is still being looked at, either family, friends, neighbors, strangers, all of that. No one is off the table until the right person is apprehended.
And when I look at this too, because I know they've said like hundreds of agents are working on this and members of law enforcement. We saw a massive SWAT presence last night. The FBI crime lab is going through stuff. I know that there was a little bit of controversy with that private lab in Florida that has a relationship with Pima County, but there is just so many people working on this. And it's like, I sit back knowing that there's probably 95% we don't know of. And it's like, how do whoever took Nancy Guthrie, like, how are they at this point not in custody? Like, when you look at this investigation and you're kind of seeing what's playing out, like, what can be the type of break in a case like this that changes everything?
I think waiting on the DNA of something they recovered, they stated from inside the house that's not Nancy's. That right now is what you focus on. And then there might be something, tomorrow that you focus on. But I think right now, that DNA sample that got sent down to Florida is going to be big. That's going to be a big part in this. That is, if that DNA is in a data system. So a lot of it, we're all holding our breath and hoping for that one break. Criminals aren't perfect. There's no perfect crime. So you hope there was a mistake made somewhere, or someone has knowledge of this that gives these guys up. Those are the hope factors that investigators deal with when you're running down leads and you're running a case like this. But I'm telling you, Chris, I'm telling you right now, all those investigators and detectives and agents are not sleeping. They're not eating. They're not going home. They are pounding this as hard as they can because you want a conclusion to this, whatever it might be. But they're not stopping, and I know that because I've been there. I've been involved in cases like this. And it becomes personal because now it's on their watch that they have to go get this person. So we're going to hope for the best.
Yeah. And now, day 14, but it does seem like there at least you hope that there's just steps forward in this investigation that can lead to that break. That may change everything. Tom Smith, retired NYPD detective, co-host of the Gold Shield Show. It's always great to have you on Law and Crime. Thanks for being with us. Thanks
for having me again, Chris.
If you have any information on Nancy Guthrie, you can contact the Pima County Sheriff at 520-351-4900. And you can also contact the FBI. 1-800-CALL-FBI is the number, or the website tips.fbi.gov. That will do it for On the Case, presented by Law and Crime. Subscribe to us on YouTube and Spotify, and we are also now streaming on Peacock. I'm Chris Stewart. See you next time.